Ever wondered what brought Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan together? On the surface, they seem like an odd alliance, separated by thousands of miles, different cultures, and even conflicting long-term goals. So, what was the glue that held the Axis powers together? Let's dive into the complex web of motivations that united Hitler, Mussolini, and Imperial Japan during World War II. It all started long before the first shots were fired. In the aftermath of World War I, these three nations felt left out and disrespected by the established global order, which was dominated by Britain, France, and the United States. Germany was crushed by the Treaty of Versailles, forced to pay massive reparations and accept blame for the war. Italy, despite being on the winning side, felt cheated out of the territorial gains it was promised. And Japan, a rising power in Asia, felt its ambitions were being blocked by Western colonial powers. This shared sense of resentment, this feeling of being an international underdog, created a powerful common ground. They saw themselves as have-not nations, fighting against the have-nations. This resentment fueled a powerful wave of ultranationalism in each country. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party promised to restore German honor and reclaim lost territories. They promoted the idea of Lebensraum, or living space, which meant expanding eastward into Slavic lands. For them, it was about creating a racially pure empire for the Aryan people. In Italy, Benito Mussolini and his fascists dreamed of reviving the glory of the Roman Empire. Creating a new Mare Nostrum, RCB dominating the Mediterranean, and in Japan, the military leadership envisioned a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. On the surface, this sounded like a plan to liberate Asia from Western colonialism, but in reality, it was a blueprint for Japanese imperial domination, securing resources like oil and rubber that the island nation desperately needed to fuel its industrial and military machine. So, the first major unifier was a shared ambition for aggressive, expansionist empire. Each nation wanted to carve out its own sphere of influence, and they realized that the existing world powers wouldn't just step aside. They would have to take what they wanted by force. This mutual desire to append the global status quo made them natural, if not entirely trustworthy allies. Ideology also played a crucial role, but it's a bit more complicated than you might think. Germany and Italy were united by fascism, a political ideology that champions authoritarianism, militarism, and extreme nationalism. Both Hitler and Mussolini were charismatic dictators who despised democracy, communism, and liberalism. They saw individual freedoms as weaknesses and believed the state and the nation were everything. This ideological kinship made their alliance, initially dubbed the Pact of Steel, feel very natural. They saw each other as revolutionary leaders forging a new, stronger type of society. But where did Japan fit in? Japan wasn't fascist in the same way Italy and Germany were. It had an emperor, Hirohito, who was revered as a divine figure, and its government was a complex mix of military factions, politicians, and business interests. However, Japan did share some key ideological similarities with its European partners. It was fiercely anti-communist, seeing the Soviet Union as a major threat to its ambitions in mainland Asia. It was also intensely militaristic, with the army and navy holding enormous power and influence over the government and society. The samurai warrior code of Bushido was twisted to promote a culture of self-sacrifice and absolute loyalty to the emperor and the state. So while the specific labels were different, the core values of anti-communism, militarism, and authoritarian rule were a common thread. This shared anti-communist stance was so important that it formed the basis of their first formal agreement, the Anti-Comintern Pact of 1936, initially signed by Germany and Japan, with Italy joining a year later. This pact was publicly aimed at combating the international spread of communism, orchestrated by the Soviet Comintern. But secretly, it contained clauses that ensured mutual support in case of an attack by the Soviet Union. This was a clear signal to the world that these three revisionist powers were aligning against a common enemy. The Soviet Union was a massive obstacle to both Germany's Lebensraum in Eastern Europe and Japan's expansion into Manchuria and China. By teaming up, they hoped to neutralize this shared threat. Another key unifier was pure opportunism. Each country saw the other's aggression as a perfect distraction. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, the League of Nations did little more than protest. This showed Hitler and Mussolini that the international community lacked the will to stop a determined aggressor. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935 and Germany reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936, the weak response from Britain and France further emboldened them. They realized that by acting simultaneously on different fronts, they could stretch their enemies thin. Hitler knew that if he invaded Poland, Britain and France would be too preoccupied in Europe to effectively challenge Japan in Asia. Likewise, Japan's war in China kept the United States and other powers focused on the Pacific, giving Hitler a freer hand in Europe. It was a strategy of coordinated chaos. This culminated in the Tripartite Pact, signed in September 1940. This was the official, formal military alliance that created the Axis. The pact recognized Germany and Italy as the dominant powers in Europe and Japan as the dominant power in East Asia. Crucially, it included a mutual defense clause. If any of the three were attacked by a power not already involved in the war, and this was aimed directly at the United States, the others would come to their aid. The goal was to intimidate America, to make it think twice about entering the war in either Europe or the Pacific. They hoped the threat of a two-ocean war would keep the U.S. neutral. Of course, as we know, this strategy backfired spectacularly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. When Japan attacked the U.S., Hitler, honoring the pact, also declared war on America. Just a few days later, a decision that ultimately sealed his fate. However, it's vital to understand that this was an alliance of convenience, not of deep trust or friendship. Their long-term goals were often in conflict. For example, both Germany and Japan had designs on the vast resources of the Soviet Union, but they never managed to coordinate a joint attack. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, without even giving Japan a heads-up. For their part, the Japanese decided to strike south towards Southeast Asia and the Pacific, targeting American, British, and Dutch territories, rather than opening a second front against the Soviets in Siberia. There was very little genuine strategic coordination between the European and Asian partners. They were fighting separate wars on separate timelines. For their own selfish interests, they were united by their enemies more than by each other. So, to sum it all up, what united the Axis powers? It was a toxic cocktail of shared grievances against the post-World War I order, a mutual desire for imperial expansion, a common ideological ground built on militarism and anti-communism, and a pragmatic, opportunistic strategy to dismantle the existing world order. They were not loyal friends, but rather partners in crime, brought together by a shared ambition to reshape the world in their own image through brutal conquest. Their alliance, while formidable for a time, was ultimately built on a foundation of self-interest and aggression, a foundation that thankfully crumbled under the weight of its own destructive ambitions. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this breakdown interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical alliances you'd like to see covered. See you in the next one.